Eikev, says Rabbi Avigdor Miller, delineates two phases of our history. It's the phase of going out of the desert and the phase of going into Eretz Yisrael. And he has a very interesting approach to our 40 years in the desert. Many commentators look at the 40 years in the desert as if those were the good times of Klal Yisrael, because they were there under the protection of the clouds of glory. People didn't have to worry about parnasa. People didn't have to worry about being sick. As the Torah says, the clothes were washed miraculously by the clouds. The clothes grew miraculously with the children. They ate miraculous food. They had miraculous water. And they spent the whole day doing what? Learning Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu. So that was like an idyllic existence in a sense. You know, what more could you want than have such an idyllic existence? In fact, that's one of the pshatim to explain the sin of the spies. That the sin of the spies was that they said, why on earth do we want to go into Eretz Yisrael and become farmers and have to go out and work the land and plant and sow? And it's much better to sit in the desert in this ideal situation of, we koil manim. Everything is provided for us. We have no problems, no worries with business and etc. And we're learning Torah all day. And yet, Rabbi Avigdor Miller comes along and he says, in the Midbar they lived a life of privation and difficulty. They ate man for 40 years. So on the one hand we say, well, this is miraculous food. This was a blessing. This was a bracha, the man. You didn't have to sit and cook. It just came down miraculously. You didn't have to go through all the process of producing food. Tasted like whatever you wanted. And here you're saying this is part of a privation and difficulty. That they ate man for 40 years. Why was this a difficulty? And how does Rabbi Avigdor Miller come to such a view? But the truth of the matter is, as you know, in Parsha's Eikev itself, it says that I gave you the man to test you and to afflict you. There was an affliction in the man. It wasn't necessarily so simple, because you didn't know from one day to the next if there would be man the next day. So you had to rely on emunah. You had to rely on emunah. And I want to go into the whole thing now. That's not really the point of the shir. But that, he says, is one of the difficulties. They didn't have homes. They had to move unexpectedly, sometimes encamping in a place for only one day before having to move. You never knew from one day to the next whether you're going to be here or not. You couldn't be settled. At any moment you had to be ready to pack up and go. That's difficult. That's a privation. You didn't have a settled home. They had no furniture. Nothing to interfere with their traveling. They had no beds. They slept on the earth. So it wasn't such a simple life according to him. And from this life of difficulty and privation, they entered a land where they would inhabit the beautiful homes of the Canaanim, tending their vineyards, orchards, and luscious fields already planted for them. And that was then, so to speak, the good life, when you could have a home and you were settled and you knew you didn't have to pack up from one day to the next. And, when you wanted to eat something, you put your teeth into a piece of steak, not a piece of man that tasted like steak, so it gave you pleasure as well, because etc. And that's the way he looks at the situation, that in fact the period in the desert was a period of privation and difficulty leading up to the brachas of Eretz Yisrael. That was where you had your life of blessing and settled and whatever. And from this he wants to learn a rule. He wants to say that we see in our national history a period of difficulty preceding a time of ease and plenty. That's the rule. First there's the difficulty, then comes the ease and plenty. And he says that's what happens in our own personal lives as well. First Hashem gives us a period of difficulty, and then he gives us the period of ease and plenty. And why does Hashem do this? So he says one of the reasons Hashem does this is that when the good times come, we will be able to appreciate them more deeply, in contrast to the difficulty through which we persevered. A man born into wealth does not appreciate his riches. However, when a poor man suddenly becomes prosperous, then he appreciates his wealth in the light of the poverty he once suffered. The tzoros are a benefit. For once one has been redeemed from his difficulties, he now has a deep pool of thankfulness from which to draw, which one who has not suffered cannot hope to reach. And this is the principle that I wanted to start off with from Eikev, because that's what's really behind what we're going to discuss about. This principle that tzoros come as a benefit, because Hashem wants us to compare the good times to the tzoros that came before, because then we will appreciate the good times in contrast to what came before. And really, the Rambam also comes along and makes the point that when tzoros come, people shouldn't just write them off as circumstance. These things happen. Says the Rambam, if that's the way you treat tzoros, that you don't take note of them and you don't use them correctly, it's an act of cruelty, he says. It's not an act of stupidity, it's an act of cruelty. Why is it an act of cruelty if there's tzoros, when Hashem sends tzoros and you don't react to them and you don't do what you need to do? You just say, oh, these things happen, circumstances. Because, says the Rambam, it's not circumstances, and Hashem is calling upon you to respond. And if you just write it off as circumstance, so you don't respond, Hashem is going to have to send more tzoros and bigger tzoros to get the message home, because the message didn't get home the first time. There's a pasuk that says, Eis tzora hi leYaakov umimena yivasheya, which means it's a time of tzora for Yaakov, but from the tzoros itself, will come the salvation. And what that is telling us is that if we use the tzora in the right way, then the tzoros itself will provide the salvation. We just have to use the tzoros in the correct way. And from now on, basically, what I'm going to tell you is a drosha that was given by Rabbi Zev Leff Shlita about 3 weeks ago in Yerushalayim. And of course, it was already the war had started. And this is what he was coming to explain, that it's an Eis Tzora, it is a time of tzoros for the Jewish people. But if we use the tzora correctly, the tzoros itself will provide the salvation. The Gemara comes along and it tells us that when sufferings come upon a person, when difficulties come upon a person, says the Gemara, Yepashpesh Lemaisef. A person has to respond to the tzoros by examining his deeds. That's what Hashem wants. He wants you to take note of the tzoros, and He wants you to think about the tzoros and to examine your deeds and try and pick up the message. What is Hashem telling you with these tzoros? And the first point that Rav Leff made is the following. He brings an example from the prophet Jonah. Jonah was a complete tzaddik. He had to be a complete tzaddik, otherwise he wouldn't have been a prophet. He was a complete tzaddik, and he was given a mission. And the mission was, as you know, to go to Nineveh, to this Goyish city of Rishoim, and to give them a warning that in 40 days' time the city would be destroyed. So clearly we can understand what Rishoim these people must have been, because if Hashem was ready to destroy the whole city, they were wicked people, and they gave Israel a lot of tzoros. And here, Jonah was being sent on a mission to go and warn them that they had 40 days basically to do something about it, otherwise the city was going to be destroyed. Now, the truth of the matter is, Jonah could have said, well, why should I go and give them this message and let them escape destruction? Let me go and occupy myself for 40 days. And they'll be destroyed. It'd be much better for Israel if they're destroyed. Would I have to go and give them a message? And why should these Rishonim be saved? Rav Lev wanted to give a mashal. Imagine that somebody was told, at the height of the war, they go and tell Nasrallah that if he does this and this and this, he'll get a tremendous salvation. Who would want to go and give him an avenue of escape? Who would want to go to such a Rosh Hashanah avenue of salvation? You'd rather say, you know what? I'd rather not fulfill this mission and let him be destroyed. So Yonah decided, you know what? He's not going to do this mission. He's not going to go to Nineveh and tell them this message and let them rather get destroyed. But he knows that it's an aveira for a Novi not to give out his nevuah. If a prophet gets a prophecy from Hashem, he is duty bound to give out that prophecy. And if he withholds that prophecy and doesn't give it out, he renders himself liable to a death penalty. Death from Shemayim. But Yonah thinks to himself, you know what? I'm prepared to give up my life for the benefit of the Jewish people. It'd be much better for the Jewish people that these people get destroyed. I'm prepared to give up my life, sacrifice my life for the benefit of the Jewish people. Other people have done it before me. Chur, for example, gave up his life in order to try and save the Jewish people from the sin of the golden calf. So he decides, I'm prepared to sacrifice my life for the Jewish people. And off he goes, and as you know, he goes into the boat. Huge storm. And where's Yonah? Yonah's sleeping in the bottom there. He's not concerned by it at all. All the people on the deck, you have all the representatives there of the 70 nations of the world, all the different kinds of idolaters. They're all praying to their various idols, all doing their strange idolatrous prayer. Worships. Nothing's happening. Storm's getting worse and worse. The captain comes down to the hold, and he says to Yonah, he says, you know what? He says, maybe you've got a 71st God that you can pray to that can help, because all the fellows on deck, they're trying everything to their respective gods. Nothing's helping. Maybe you can pray to your God and it'll help. And the moment he says that, Yonah says to him, it's my fault, it's all because of me. Throw me into the sea and everything will be okay. Now, the question, we all know that's written in the Parsha in Yonah, but the question that Rav Lev asks is, why should Yonah say such a thing? Why should Yonah assume that he is the problem? He is a tzaddik gomer. He's a holy, righteous Jew. He's got one little sin to his name. He's made one sin. What's his sin? I'm prepared to give up my life for the Jewish people. That's not such a bad sin, to give up your life for the Jewish people. What? I'm withholding this prophecy and I'm prepared to give up my life for my Jewish people. But otherwise, I'm a perfect tzaddik. I'm a holy man. I'm a kodesh. I'm a Torah. Here you've got all these murderers and robbers and adulterers and immoral people and all these worshipping their idols on the deck. If this ship is going to sink because of somebody's sins, surely Yonah should have said, it's my one little sin, surely that brought this about. They're much worse. They've done much wrong, more wrong. If this storm is coming for anybody, it's coming because of them. It's not coming because of me. I'm the good guy around here. And yet we see Yonah doesn't say that. Yonah understands immediately with all the idolatry and what all these people are upset. It's not because of them, it's because of him. And he knows that, and he tells the captain immediately, it's all because of me. Why did Yonah know that it was because of him? Why should he think it's all because of him? And the answer that Rav Lev wants to draw out of that is because Yonah understood Hashem doesn't expect anything from these guys on the deck, these idolaters. What do they know? But Hashem expects a lot from a Novi Hashem. From a person who is a prophet of Hashem, Hashem expects a lot. From idolaters and these people up there, he doesn't expect too much. And therefore, if Hashem is now coming along to bring this storm, he knows it's because of me, not because of them. And the lesson that Rav Lev wants to draw from that is it's the same thing. Hashem doesn't expect too much from irreligious Jews, from Jews who don't know because they haven't been taught, they've been estranged from their religion for generations. When he brings this tzoros on Klal Yisrael, it's not because he's bringing it for them. They don't know better. Hashem is bringing it so that the frum Jews, the ones who expect something from, the ones who do know, the ones like the Yonah, that they are the ones who have to take note, because those are the ones that Hashem is talking to. Those are the ones Hashem knows they're listening. So we might be tempted to sit here and think, if Hashem sends the tzoros to Klal Yisrael, who are the bad guys? Who is Hashem cross with? Is he cross with the guys who are not keeping Shabbos, the guys who are marrying shiksas, the guys who are eating treifus and chazir and all the rest of it? It's their fault. They're the guys, the gay guys who want to march through Jerusalem. Those are the guys who this tzoros is coming for. We're the good guys. We're from religious Jews. What you see from Yonah, it's exactly not like that. Hashem doesn't expect too much from those people. But from his frum Jews, that's the ones he's talking to. And therefore, when the Gemara comes along and it says that we should be mepashmish b'maisev, if tzoros comes in Klal Yisrael, you have to examine your deeds. Who has to examine the deeds? It's the frum Jews, the ones who are listening to Hashem. So we have to examine our deeds. Good. So we have to examine our deeds. What does Hashem want from us? What's He trying to tell us with these tzoros that have come upon Klal Yisrael? So he quotes from the Chafetz Chaim. And the Chafetz Chaim gives us a general principle. And the Chafetz Chaim says, whenever Jews don't appreciate what they are supposed to appreciate, and because they don't appreciate it, they don't use it or relate to it in the correct way, then the best way to make someone appreciate is either to take it away from him or to threaten to take it away. Because when you don't have it, then you want it. And when you want it, then you appreciate it. And that, of course, is a known thing. When it's taken away, that's when you appreciate. Most people appreciate their parents only when they're gone. Most people appreciate their health only when it's gone. So, if Jewish people, aren't appreciating what they've been given, then the way Hashem makes sure that they will appreciate it is either to take it away or to threaten to take it away. And that's what you see, for example, many times in Jewish history. Hashem gave us a Beis HaMikdash. It was a tremendous privilege that we had a Beis HaMikdash, that we had a house in which the presence of Hashem was present, where you could walk into the house and feel the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You could see open miracles. But what happened? The Jewish people didn't appreciate what they had, and it came to the stage that the Beis HaMikdash became like a place of Avodah Zarah. They weren't worshipping Hashem properly in the Beis HaMikdash. And it was almost like a place of Avodah Zarah. Strange service. So Hashem sent tzoros. Before the temple was destroyed, Hashem sent tzoros to wake the Jewish people up, to say, take note. They didn't listen, so Hashem took away the Beis HaMikdash. And that's the principle. We have to appreciate what we have, otherwise we stand to lose it. Now, says Rav Lev, we want to look at the tzoros that have come upon Klal Yisrael now, and he was talking 3 weeks ago. He says, examine the details of what happened, and that will give us the clues to what Hashem is telling us, and then look at the pattern, because the details are one thing, but the details form a pattern. You must see the bigger picture as well as the smaller picture. It's no use seeing the trees and not the forest. So let's look at the details, he says. What started the whole thing? What started the whole tzoros? The tzoros started, he says, with the kidnapping of a young soldier, a young Yiddish boy. His freedom was taken away from him. That's what it means to be captive, to have your freedom taken away from you. So the first thing he says we have to take a message is to think. To think about what does it mean to have one's freedom taken away from one. What does it mean? Do we understand what it means to be a captive? That you can't stand up and walk out of a place if you want to. That you don't know when you'll be released, if you'll be released. That's what it means to have freedom taken away from us. We have to think about that. What it means to be free. Do we appreciate our freedom? The second thing he says that follows from that incident is that this boy was snatched away from his family. Can we understand how the family feels? Do we, and any idea, do we think about what it means to not know whether your child is alive or dead? To not know where your child is? To not know whether you're ever going to see your child or not again? How that tears apart a family. So Hashem is telling us, do you appreciate your families? The third point, he says, is obviously this boy's life is in danger. And because of that, the first one, we know that 2 other Yiddish boys were kidnapped in the north, and their freedom was taken away from them, and their lives are in danger. And because of that, Klal Yisrael came under fire. And now everybody's lives there are in danger, or were certainly at the time he was talking. And because of that, because of this war, we actually ran the danger that Eretz Yisrael itself could be taken away from us. So he says you've got 4 things to think about, what Hashem may be telling us. Do you appreciate your freedom? And are you using it correctly? Do you appreciate your families? Do you appreciate your lives? And are you using them correctly? And do you appreciate Eretz Yisrael? Now, let's start off, as he does, with Eretz Yisrael. What does Eretz Yisrael mean to us? And as you'll see, as we go on, it's not just the physical territory of Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael represents a philosophy. Eretz Yisrael represents a lifestyle and a manner of looking at the world and living one's life. As you'll see now, there's a medrash. The medrash comes along and it says that before Avram Avinu was given the commandment of Lech Lecha, to go to the specific land that Hashem was going to show him, Avram Avinu himself took a world tour, so to speak, and went around from one place to another, looking at the various lands around him, to try and find a place that he would want to settle down and one day bring up a family. Because he had emunah and betochen that he would have children and he would bring up a family. So he went around looking at the various places to see where he would like to live, what sort of environment was available around him in which to bring up a family, a nation. So he first comes to Aram Naharaim. And when he comes to Aram Naharaim, what does he see? He sees a whole lot of idolaters. And they're drinking, and they're eating, and they're partying, making merry. And he says, Rabbeinu Shalom, please, this is not the place for me. Don't make me come and live in this place. And he carries on his tour, and he comes to Eretz Yisrael. And what does he see in Eretz Yisrael? He sees a whole lot of idolaters. But these idolaters are planting, and they're plowing, and they're harvesting. He says, this is where I want to be. And the question, of course, that arises is, but these are idolaters and those are idolaters. What's the difference? At the end of the day, you're still talking about in a land that's full of idol worshippers. Why is the one kind of idol worshipper better than the other kind of idol worshipper? So to answer that, he brings a statement from the Meiri, one of the Rishonim. The Meiri says, Olam Habo, the world to come, is the fruit of this world. This world and the next world, he says, are not two separate worlds. They're not two different worlds. There's one world. In this world, one plants the seeds, and you fertilize, and you cultivate. And in the next world, you get the profit, you get the fruit. The Gemara brings it in the following words, Hayom lo asosom, today is a day for working. Umachar, and tomorrow, the next world, the kabel skar. That's where you're going to get your reward. And that's what we can call the philosophy of the fruit. That this world is for planting and sowing and cultivating and fertilizing, but the fruit, the reward, is in the next world. Philosophy of the fruit. And comes along Rav Leff, and he says that this point is the line of demarcation between the philosophy of Esav, representing the secular philosophy of life, the philosophy of the nations of the world, and the Torah philosophy of life, of Yaakov. This philosophy of the fruit, of working today to get the reward in the future. And he illustrates it in the following way. He says if one looks at the secular philosophy of life, he says it was best portrayed on a T-shirt that he saw in New York that was selling like hotcakes. One of these T-shirts, with the slogans on. And what was the slogan on this T-shirt? The slogan on the T-shirt was, the one who has the most toys when he dies wins. That's the secular philosophy. The one who has the most toys when he lives wins. What does that mean? It means that this world is a place for amassing toys. When you're small, there's small toys. When you get bigger, they're bigger toys. But that's what the purpose in this world is. Who can amass the most toys? You're given a certain amount of time in this world. You're born and you die. And whoever can amass the most toys in the interim, he's the guy who wins the game. Now, what are these toys? These toys, he says, are anything which give pleasure. All the various different types of pleasure that you can get in the world, or power, or covered. These are the toys that people come into the world and they want to amass. And that's what life is all about. The one who amasses the most toys during his period here, he wins. The question he asks, of course, is, well, what do you win? Because since the winner is only determined after you're dead, so what do you actually win? And then he said he saw that somewhere a woman in America was buried in her Rolls Royce. So he said, that's it. She had the biggest toy. She had the Rolls Royce, it was the biggest toy, so she was buried with it, Rolls Royce. But he says, if that's what life is all about, the secular philosophy of just how much pleasure can you amass, how much pleasure can you enjoy in this world, he says that's a very depressing philosophy of life. Because what? It means, and in this philosophy, he says there's no intrinsic importance to life. There's no intrinsic importance to life. It's just a question of pleasure. How much pleasure can you get out of this world in the time that you're here? Now, if that's what life is all about, how much pleasure do you get? Then what is the value of a life, for example, of a person who can't see? How much pleasure does he lose out from the fact that he can't see? Or he can't hear? Or to take it to extreme, a man's lying in a coma. If a man's lying in a coma and the philosophy of life, that the value of life is just how much pleasure can you get out of this world? How many toys can you amass? Then a guy is lying in a coma. It's got no value to his life at all. You may as well just switch off the plug. Because what's the value of such a life if that's what life is about? It has no intrinsic value. But as we'll see later on, in the Jewish life, even a Jew in a coma, every second is precious. Because it's a different philosophy of life. But we'll come to it. Esav is the one who represents this secular philosophy of life. which says that this world is just to amass toys. Get as much pleasure and power and strength and might as you can in this world and glory, because that's what it's all about. And it's interesting, that's why Esav, as we know, is a hunter. Esav is a hunter. What is a hunter? A hunter is a person who's not interested in an animal until the animal has grown and ready to be shot and eaten. That's when he's interested in an animal. I'm a hunter. I want to eat. I want to eat now. And all I want now is I want an animal that's available and ready for me to shoot now and eat. I want instant gratification. Yaakov, by contrast, is a shepherd. What's the difference between a shepherd and a hunter? A shepherd puts a lot of work and effort into a little animal, to a baby animal, at a time when that animal is not going to give him any benefit at all. But a shepherd is one who understands, I'm prepared to put in the effort and the work now for the future benefit. It's not an instant gratification. A hunter, the animal has to be ready for me now. I'm interested in it. To tend to this little animal and to look after it, and then we saw from Moshe to run after it and do whatever is necessary to preserve it, because in the future this animal is going to give me a benefit. That's again the same philosophy as the fruit. That the Jewish philosophy is not one of how much pleasure do I get now, how much instant gratification can I get from this world. I'm working now for a future benefit. And it's interesting that the name Yaakov, the root of the name Yaakov is Eikev. Eikev was the name of our Parsha. The Medrash says, Rav Miller brings it, that one of the reasons that we talk about Eikev, if you will observe my commandments, but it uses the word Eikev, it's coming to tell you that if you observe my commandments, in the end, in the future, there's going to be a recompense. You're working now, but in the end, you will get your just desserts, either be it reward or punishment, whatever it is. But that's, again, Yaakov. Yaakov is a person who looks what will be at the end, not looking what's going to be right now. I'm working for the future, for the end. Esav comes from the word asui. Asui means something that is complete, it's ready, it's being made. Esav is not looking to the future, what will be in the future. Esav wants it now. It must be ready, it must be made, it must be complete now. That's the instant gratification. And he says that's the difference between the Goyish philosophy and the Torah philosophy. Now let's go back to Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu saw two different lands. Yes, they were both idolaters. But they were acting in a different way than two sets of idolaters. Why? Because he understood the environment created a different philosophy. In Aham Narayan, the philosophy was eat, drink, be merry. That's the Esav philosophy. That's the secular philosophy. That's the environment of the world. Instant gratification. But when he comes to Eretz Canaan, even though they're idolaters, he sees these idolaters have a different outlook on life. And he understands it's because of their place. The place has created an environment which breeds, which gives out a different message. What's the environment of Eretz Yisrael? It's an environment of you plant, you cultivate, you prepare, you work for the future. They are idolaters, but they are idolaters who are working the soil, who are working now for a future benefit. That's what he saw. He said, this is the place that I want to be. Because this place can even, so to speak, impregnate the idolaters with this philosophy of the fruit. That this world is not for instant gratification. This is a world that you build and you work and you plant for the future. And that's why he said to Hashem, this is the place for me. And by the way, Rav Lev notes that it's interesting that the original Chalutzim who came to Eretz Yisrael, they weren't Jews. They weren't from Jews, religious Jews. They were secular Jews. They were Zionists, whatever it was. But even they what did they do? They spent a lot of time and effort draining the swamps and building the land and improving the land. Even they were affected, so to speak, by this environment of Eretz Yisrael that promotes this attitude of there's more to life than instant gratification. Build and plant for the future. Work for the future. Now, he says, if that's the philosophy, not that you can't have pleasure in this world. The Jewish philosophy, the Torah philosophy is not that you can't have pleasure in this world and that you can't have gratification in this world. Of course you can have gratification in this world, and of course you can enjoy this world. And Hashem wants us to enjoy this world. But the difference is that's not the goal. That's not the goal that we set ourselves. The goal that we set ourselves is to create an eternity. The goal is spiritual, eternal, next world. Now if that's the philosophy, then every moment in this life, he says, is an eternity. And with this concept now, we can understand what the Telzer Rosh Yeshiva explained the Gemara. It's a very well-known Gemara mentioned in this share. I'm sure you know it from other places. Very well-known Gemara about this gentleman called Elazar ben Dodaya who spent his whole life in sin. And eventually comes to a point where the enormity of a lifetime of sin hits him like a ton of bricks. And he suddenly realizes what he's done with his life, and he decides he has to make a tshuva. And as we know, he makes a tremendous tshuva. Such an intense and tremendous tshuva does he make that he actually dies from the effort. He loses his life from that intensity of the tshuva that he does. And when he dies, a voice comes out from heaven, and it says, Rabbi Elazar ben Dodaya has now been readied for the life of the world to come. Not only was he forgiven for a lifetime of sin, but he even achieved the level that they call him Rabbi. And he's now going to have Olam Haba from this one tremendous tshuva that he did at the end of his life. And the Gemara tells us that when Rebbe, great Tana Rebbe, heard of this, he cried. And he said, there is one who acquires his place in the world to come only through many years of striving and suffering. And there is another who acquires his world to come in a single moment. So Rebbe cried that, look here, you see from this chap, Elazar ben Dodaya, in a single moment, in one tshuva, he gets Olam Haba. Asks the Telzer of Rosh Yeshiva, what are you crying about? Is that something to cry about? That you see that a Jew can do a tshuva and get Olam Haba after a lifetime of sin? Isn't that something maybe to rejoice about? That there's such a powerful thing called tshuva, that it can wipe out a whole life of sin and give you Olam Haba in one moment. What's he crying about? And he explains what Rebbe understood is that if you can acquire Olam Haba in one moment, but then in every moment of your life is an opportunity to acquire another Olam Haba. Because there wasn't anything unique about that moment. If a Jew can acquire an Olam Haba in one moment, it means all the moments of our lives are available to acquire more Olam Haba and more Olam Haba and more Olam Habas. If that's the case, we can understand that in a Torah philosophy, every moment of life is precious, because every moment is an opportunity to acquire another piece of Olam Haba. Now, you can take a Jew who is lying on his bed, racked with pain, tremendous agony, could even be dying, could even be in a coma, as long as he's still got the ability to think. And every moment of that life is precious. Why? The Gemara even brings it in Sanhedrin. Suffering is precious, Because every moment you can be doing tshuva. Every moment you can be fulfilling the mitzvah of loving Hashem, of fearing Hashem, of thinking about the mitzvahs that you would do if you could. Because we have another principle that says if you want to do a mitzvah but you can't do it for beyond your control, it's considered as if you did the mitzvah. So here you can see the complete difference. With the Jew, chas v'shalom, in a coma, you don't switch off the plug. You don't say, well, life is just about amassing toys, and this fellow can't amass toys anymore. He's past that. So therefore his life has no meaning. No. Every second of life is an opportunity to create another Olam Haba. And that's the value of life. And that's what Hashem wants us to appreciate. Do you appreciate the value of life? A Jewish life. You're not amassing toys. You're amassing eternity. So, Rav Lev makes the following point. He says that Avraham Avinu, when he looked at those idolaters in Eretz Canaan, planting, even they, although they were working for a future benefit, not for immediate gratification, but even for them it was a short-term benefit. They were just concerned about having fruit next season. With the Jew, it's having fruit next world. That's what we're looking for, the fruit next world, not fruit next season. And he says that Eretz Yisrael is conducive to that philosophy. The whole environment of Eretz Yisrael is conducive to that philosophy. It's a holy land which brings one to that way of life. So what does it mean? It means, he says, that in Eretz Yisrael, if you want to live a secular life, you can live a secular life in Eretz Yisrael. But what? In order to live a secular life in Eretz Yisrael, you have to fight the environment. Because the environment is actually pulling you in the opposite direction. The very environment of Eretz Yisrael is shouting out, this is not a place for amassing toys, for instant gratification. This is a land that says, build, plant for the future. So you have to fight the environment to live a secular life in Eretz Yisrael. In Chutz La'aretz, it's exactly the opposite. You can live a Torah life in Chutz La'aretz. You can live a very nice Torah life in Chutz La'aretz. But you also have to fight the environment. Because the environment in Chutz La'aretz is not a Torah-orientated life. It's a secular-orientated life. So either way you have to fight. If you're living here, you have to fight the environment if you want to live a holy life. If you're living in Eretz Yisrael, you have to fight the environment if you want to live a secular life. And he brought an incident which he himself experienced, which shows this very contrast between what the environment of Eretz Yisrael produces and what the environment of Chutz La'aretz produces. And he says as follows. In Eretz Yisrael they had a thing called Shua HaSefer, which means a week of the books. And what was the week of the books? It means for 1 week, whatever it was, all the various bookshops would have a special display of all the new books, and they would put out all the books on the tables, and the people would come. It would be an outing. It would be an outing. You would take your family, and the outing would be that you would walk around the various tables and look at all the new books and enjoy all the new books. What? Enjoy all the new books. And that was the outing. And that's what he did. He took his family, they went and they spent a couple of hours enjoying themselves, looking at all the new books, what was available, food for the mind. And then he took his family home, and he had to go to America that same night. So he dropped his family at home and he went off to the airport. He got onto the plane, and 11 hours later he was in New York. And he's met in New York, and the fellow who meets him in New York, he says, maybe you'll be interested to come to this convention center. They're having a kosher fair. Maybe you're interested in seeing the kosher fair. What's the kosher fair? The kosher fair is that all the producers of kosher food products in America, they also have their tables. And you can walk around their tables, you pay an entrance fee, and you walk around their tables and you can, taste all the new kosher food products. And that's what they do in America. They go along and they look at it and tasting all the new kosher foods. And he said it just struck him. This has got to be a sign. This has got to be a message that is telling you something about where the emphasis of the Yiddishkeit lies. In Eretz Yisrael, they're going around looking at books. And in America, New York, they're going around tasting all the latest delicacies and gourmet delights. And this is the environment. This is the difference. And what really got to him is he sees in America they have a 24-hour hotline for kashrus. Now what's a 24-hour hotline for kashrus? You know, you can have 24-hour hotlines for serious things, you know. People who are in psychological distress, or, you know, they're feeling suicidal. You can phone up a helpline. Well, they have a 24-hour hotline for kashrus, which means what? That if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and there's a sweet, and you decide, I feel like that sweet, and then you look at your sweet, but you're not sure the hechsher. You can phone up some rabbi at 3 o'clock in the morning and he's waiting there to get your call to tell you right now, is this sweet kosher or not? That chas v'sholem, you shouldn't wait till the morning to have to find out. You have to wait 4 hours until you see your own rabbi in the morning to ask him if the sweet is kosher. Wait? What do you mean wait? I've got a sweet, I've got to have it right now. So therefore you've got to have a 24-hour kashrus line. There have got to be some rabbis who are going to be sitting up all night waiting for you to phone them and say, can I eat this? Now. That, he says, is the difference. Eretz Yisrael inspires the philosophy of the fruit. That's what it inspires. Eretz Yisrael is not just the country Eretz Yisrael, it's the philosophy that it engenders. That we plant for the next world. That we plant for the next world. And when Hashem gives us such a philosophy, that we are here not to amass toys, but to amass eternity, then, says Rav Lev, life becomes important. Freedom becomes important. Because what are you giving? Why does Hashem give you freedom? What do you need the freedom for? You need freedom so that you're able to go and put on tefillin. You have freedom so you can go to the base of Midrash. And you can learn Torah. You have freedom to go around and do mitzvahs and to amass eternity. That's the purpose of freedom. That's why He gives us this freedom. And when you have a boy there sitting in wherever he is, Gaza, and you have to think, what does it mean his freedom is taken away? That's the end. You can't do anything. You can't go and put on tefillin. You can't go to the base of Midrash. You can do nothing. Now, the last part. Life, obviously, we don't have to talk about the value of life. And then, obviously, we don't have to talk about that and what you should be doing with one's life. It's not for amassing toys. Family. The importance of families. Oh, by the way, just before we leave that, this whole difference between the philosophy of the Goyim, instant gratification, drink, eat and be merry, versus planting for a long-term future. It just occurred to me that this is probably the pshat in Noach. And in fact I see that Rabbi Munk brings it, the same thought. Noach comes out of the table, comes out of the ark. The world has been destroyed. And now he's going to be restarting the world. What's the first thing you do? You've just seen a world that's been destroyed because of the secular philosophy. And now what are you going to do? You want to replant a world. You're going to now start a world again. What does Noach do? He plants a vineyard. And the Torah says Noah, the man of the earth, debased himself and planted a vineyard. He started off at the beginning of the Parsha. You remember, at the beginning of the Parsha, it calls him Noach Ish Tzaddik. He was a righteous man, the Tomim. If my memory serves me. Tzaddik Tomim Hayah. Righteous man, perfect. And then he's called a man of the earth. How did he become a man of the earth? debased himself and planted a vineyard. In his commentary, Rabbi Munk says the following words. He says, Noah escapes the terrible calamity. He comes out safe and sound from a nightmarish existence in the ark, lasting an interminable year, and yet his first thought is to taste life's pleasures once more. Because the vine represents, grapes, wine represents a life of merriment, enjoyment, etc. Exactly the philosophy of Esav. And that's where it all went wrong again. It wasn't planting for the future. Rashi says he should have planted something different. He should have planted wheat. Wheat is where you build human food, sustenance, not merriment. Okay, now, last one. Family, the importance of family. So Rav Aleph brings a medrash from Parshas Noach. It says that Lemishpachoseihem yotzei min hateva. When they came out of the ark, they came out of the ark according to their families. Because there was Noach and there was his children. They came out of the ark according to their families. And says the Medrash Mikan, from here we learn sheyotzei mi beis hakneses mishpachos. From here we learn that when you come out of the beis hakneses, when you come out of shul, you should come out of the shul in families. What's coming out of the ark, Noah's ark, got to do with coming out of shul? They went out in families. How you go out in families? What's the connection? So he says that the simple meaning is that there's a play on words here. Because Noah's ark is called a teva, and you find that in Talmudic literature as well, the shul, it's called teva. You go down to the Amud to Daven, it's called the teva. So the shul is called a teva, and Noah's ark is called a teva. And in fact, in English you have the same connection of the words. You have the ark, the holy ark in shul, and you have Noah's ark. This is an ark, that's an ark. They also have the same connection. What is the deeper meaning there? He says the following. We're living in a world where we are inundated with a flood of dangerous, threatening waters. Waters that want to drown us physically and spiritually. How do we protect ourselves from these dangerous waters? You can't run away. You can't isolate yourself from the evil. It's all around. There's no way you can isolate yourself from the evil. The point was made, and it's obvious, people think, you're not living in Eretz Yisrael, you have the threat of terrorism. If you're not in Eretz Yisrael, you don't have the threat of terrorism. It's not true. You're living in New York, you're living in London, you're living in Spain, you have terrorism. So you can't isolate yourself from the evil, it's all around. But what you can do is you can insulate yourself from it. The Teva, Noah's ark, represented the insulation from the flood waters without. And in a symbolical sense, the shul, the base of Midrash, represents the Teva, which insulates you from also the flood waters without, turbulence from outside. And as long as Noach was in the Teva, and as long as the Jews in his base of Midrash or in his base of Knesset, in his davening and his learning Torah, so you're insulated. You're insulated from all those turbulent waters outside that threaten to drown you. But you have a problem. Noah couldn't live the rest of his life in the ark. And a Jew can't spend his whole life living in a shul. You've got to come out the shul. You've got to come out the table. So what's going to happen with your insulation? This is what the Medrash is coming to say on a deeper level. You come out with your families. What does it mean you come out with your families? So says Rav Lev, if you create in your families the same standards and the same values that you have in the base Midrash, that you have in the shul, then you can take the insulation with you. If you come out of the base Midrash with your families, it means that you can recreate in your home, in your family, the same values and principles that apply in the shul. Then you're still in the table. you're still in the ark, because your home becomes an extension of the Beis Medrash. The home becomes an extension of the shul. So we had 4 pratim, we had 4 individual things. We had freedom, life, family, and Eretz Yisrael. And Eretz Yisrael represents the concept. So, says Rav Lev, if we put them all together, it becomes a unity. It becomes a unity. It becomes a unity that centers around the philosophy of the fruit. That our life is meaningful because we are building for the next world. Every moment of this life in this world is precious because we are building Olam Haba. Every second, like Rebbe Eliezer ben Dodaya, is another second that you create in eternity. If that's the philosophy of your life, then every moment of life is important. Every moment of freedom is important because you have freedom to do what you need to do. Every moment of family is important because that's the way you extend your teva out into the wider environment. And Eretz Yisrael is what links it all. Not just the land of Eretz Yisrael, the philosophy of Eretz Yisrael. The philosophy of the fruit. That's the philosophy that Eretz Yisrael engenders. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu is calling out to us is by giving us soros. Soros means examine your deeds. If you're not appreciating what you have, or you're not using what you have in the right way, Hashem says, I'm giving you now the opportunity. I'm giving you the threat of taking it away. Don't. We mustn't let that happen, that Hashem takes it away. We have to be passionate about it. We have to consider it, think about it, fix it. And then he says, if we do all of that, by appreciating more our freedom, our lives, our families in Eretz Yisrael, then he says Hashem should bring about these boys would come home safe, that all the people who had to live in bomb shelters and had lost their freedom should all be able to come free again, until we have the ultimate freedom, of course, which is coming of Mashiach in Meir V'Yameinu.